Rushifart, how to set up and play. Rushifart is a game about coal transport on the Ruhr River in Germany in the 18th and 19th century. Let's start by looking at the player pieces. Every player will get a player board. They'll get 10 warehouse pieces. They'll get 12 development cubes. They'll get 1 score marker and a 30-point chip if they pass that on the victory point track. Start every player on 0. They'll get 1 action marker that we can put next to the special actions used in the game. Every player will start with 1 barge, and then they'll start with 8 progress markers. These are the technologies in the game that can be earned from delivering coal. So these 6 progress markers correspond to these 6 on the board that'll get placed once they're earned, and these 2 progress markers correspond to these 2 spots that'll get placed. I'm playing with the expansion, so this is the expansion board for each player, and it has 2 additional one-time use technologies that can be earned throughout the game. So we're going to set up the one-time use technologies. These are limited, and again they can be used one time during the game. We'll place these in stacks based on the number of players. We'll always use 1 less than the number of players. So I'm setting this up for a 2-player game. So I'm going to use 1 of each of these special markers. There are 2, the mare and the rail line, these 2, that if it was a 4-player game, you'd actually only use 2 of these. So instead of 3, you'd use 2, but normally it's just 1 less than the number of players. From the players' 10 starting warehouses, we're actually going to place 9 of them on the board. So 2 warehouses from each player will get placed on this spot here. Players will earn them once they build their first lock in the game. Players will get these warehouses back. 2 warehouses from each player will get placed up here in the Grafschaft Mark region, and players will earn these immediately once they earn the Grafschaft Mark technology. They can get those warehouses, and then 5 warehouses will get placed on the round track wherever you see this house marker, and then when we get to that round or turn in the game, players will get these warehouses. So you can see this house marker is on turns 6, 7, 9, 10, and 11. So you'll place those up there. That'll leave every player with 1 starting warehouse to begin the game. I mentioned the game is played over 12 rounds that correspond historically to the development of coal transport on the Ruhr River in Germany. So we have the round marker right here. And then this is the export marker, the Ruhrhort export marker. We'll set it right there. We'll also put the starting export flags on the game board. So we'll shuffle these flags, and you can place them face down is the standard version, or if you want to play with the planner variant, you can turn these all face up so players know which exports are coming and by when. So I've gone ahead and turned them face up. I'm going to play with the planner variant. You can see we've got Belgium, Rhineland, and the Netherlands, and these were randomly placed. This will indicate which countries are have the demand for coal exports from Germany during that round. Next, we'll shuffle all of the lock tiles that have this background on them. We'll shuffle those up and randomly place them on the 14 lock spaces on the board. That's this symbol right here. So we'll do that now. So what these tiles represent was rough spots on the river, man-made dams for fishing, basically obstacles that inhibited the transport of coal along the river. And one of the key mechanics in the game is when coal is transported across any number of these, they'll always decrease in value by 1 pip. So throughout the game, players can build these locks by simply removing these tiles, and it represents man-made locks that made coal transport smoother, thus eliminating the reduction in the quality of coal or coal degrading in quantity. Once you've put the 14 lock tiles on the board, face down, you'll take the remaining ones. I'm also playing with the mini expansion. You'll take the remaining ones and these color tiles and randomly throw them into the draw bag. Next, we're going to seed all the dice on the game board, and it's based on the number of players. But in all games, we'll always put a 3 pip value die on this first arrow spot, or the transport spot, of the brick earth column. This is the paved road column, and this is the rails column. So you can check the rule book or a player aid. I'm using my player aid that I created, and then based on the different regions in the game and the number of players, you will see dice. So you'll see there are 2 coal spots in the Broich territory. So in a 2-player game, I'll put a 4 black on the first spot, and I'll leave the second one empty. So in this Broich region, there were 2 coal spots moving from left to right, and I put 1 there, and I left that empty. So based on the chart, you will seed the board based on the pips and the location of all the dice. So once the board's been seeded with the dice, you're ready to start play. A couple reminders. As we've talked about, every player will start with 1 warehouse, but they can earn the other 9 throughout the game when they build their first locks, when they build in Grafschaft Mark, or when they get to that point of the game in terms of round. Also, players can take debt at any time. They can take a loan. So to do that, they have to have an available warehouse. Simply place it on a spot there, and they can get 2 thalers, or money, from the bank. These have to be paid back by paying back 3 thalers, and they get paid back during a specific round, during a specific phase of the game. But you can take the debt at any time where you need the thalers, as long as you have an available warehouse to place there. After setup, the game will play the same for 2, 3, or 4 players, with the only exception in a 2 or a 3-player game, there's a small variant when we build locks, and I'll cover that when we get there. A couple of final cleanup things before we start the game. Any dice that weren't used in seeding the board are simply just removed from the game. Create your supply of thalers, or money. You'll also have these blank technology things. So for example, if you weren't able to earn that, these just get simply used as markers to indicate, you know what, I can no longer earn that because someone already took that limited marker. And then next to the special actions track, we'll have the tile that blocks the use of captain actions that comes into play, and the tiles that increase the value of some of these special actions that come in later. So the general flow of a phase is at the start of every round, we will execute the event, the historical event, based on the time period. Then we'll draw a tile from the bag. This will determine the water level and the demand for coal. So different things will happen based on the tile that gets drawn. Then all players will choose their barge position on the river. They always have to choose a position adjacent to a coal die, because every turn they will be delivering coal and collecting thalers. So once all players have chosen their barge position and have possibly, optionally, selected a special action that aids them in that process, the next phase will be actually delivering coal. And typically, you always deliver 2 spaces downriver. So this space, a barge here would go 1, 2, and deliver to this city. So the benefit of delivering coal is twofold. You will earn thalers based on the pips on the coal die. Any extra thalers earned from any ones that were left on the board from extra demand. And then you also start to gain technology. So you deliver coal to get money and technology, and then in the next phase, based on the technology you've gained, you may earn progress markers that you place on your board, and then you use these progress markers to build infrastructure along the Ruhr River, and that's how you score victory points. So by building locks and warehouses will score you victory points. And then the last phase of the game, or last phase of the round, is an exports phase, and it'll happen in the rounds where there's actually external demand for coal. So players that have actually exported and have built warehouses in this Ruhr region will score victory points there. So that's the rough structure of a phase. We do a historical event based on the round. We draw a tile for water level and demand. All players will choose their barge position and special option. Then, in turn order, we deliver coal and earn thalers and get technology cubes. Then we see what technologies we qualify for, what progress markers. Then we make purchases and score VPs. And then finally we do exports. So let's cover each of those phases in depth. So the first phase of every round is the historical event phase. So let's go through each of these. They'll make more sense as you understand how the rest of the game works, but we'll cover all the iconography now. So the first historical event in 1769 is we basically select start player. This will be selected randomly, and then for just this first round, play will proceed clockwise. After that, the turn order is always determined by which player's barge is further upriver or further to the right on the game board. That will always determine who acts first in the round. Just for this first round, we'll randomly determine it and just move clockwise in terms of the initial barge placement. And once those barges get placed, then turn order is always determined by who's further upriver. The next historical event for the next game round would be 1774. Now, this is when players have the ability to start building locks, and locks cost 2 thalers each. Now, keep in mind, the player would also have to have the technology acquired to build locks, but we'll cover that later. This symbol up here during the historical event indicates where coal will be delivered or placed back on the board if it ever gets forced out of this transport track. So as dice get placed here, they always move down, they never move up. This dice might get eventually pushed out of this column, and this indicates where it gets placed. So that symbol corresponds to this symbol, so this Essen region, or this dark green region in Germany. So if the dice get forced out, the current start player will decide where to place the dice, and if there are multiple regions, or if there are multiple coal spots within the region available, that player would decide. So this might be a good time to kind of see the different regions in the game. So here is the Ruhr region. This light green is the Breich region. This small purple section here is the Herzogtumberg region. This orange is the Reichsbüttel-Werden region. As we mentioned, this dark green is the Essen region. And over here is the Grafschaft Mark region. That's this light blue area. So down here on the coal transport track, you'll always see that white dice, when they get pushed out, they always go to the Grafschaft Mark region, and that's the light blue area. Whereas when black dice get pushed out of the track, they go to one of these other 3 regions, either Breich, Essen, or Werden. But it's based on the current historical event and where the marker is, and the start player will decide that. The next historical event is 1775. All players must pay a thaler or lose a victory point, and any black coal that gets pushed out will get delivered back somewhere in the Worden region. In 1779, a couple things happen. If we're playing with the other variant, we'd reveal this flag to see which country was demanding exports. Also, all black dice would get pushed from this earth track to the paved track. So if we had 1, 2, 3 dice here, all 3 would get pushed there. Let's say this entire track was full and it would get pushed over. You can see this one would not have a spot, so this would have to get delivered or replaced on the board by the start player to the Breutsch region. In 1780, the cost to build locks has increased from 2 to 3, and that'll stay in effect for the rest of the game. We'll reveal or see whatever the new export flag is, and then any coal, black coal that gets pushed out of the transport track will get delivered to this dark green Essen region. In 1782, all players will get a victory point or a thaler, their choice. We see the next flag. Any black coal that gets pushed out, start player will put them somewhere in the Worden region. And also, don't forget, players will now get these warehouses returned to them available for use. In 1784, players will also receive additional warehouses. We'll see the flag. We see that any black coal dice that get pushed out will now get returned by the start player to the Breutsch region. And also, the cost for any fee-based actions increase by 1. So we'll go down here, and we haven't covered these yet, but we see these actions cost 1, and these actions normally cost 2. Once we get to that historical round during the game, we'll use these markers to say these actions now permanently cost 2, and these actions permanently cost 3. So as we get later in the game, the cost for taking these actions will have gone up. In 1787, we see that any dice that get pushed out are returned to the Essen region. We see the next flag, and we also see that all coal dice, black and white, on the transport track get moved to the rails. So in this example, they were on the paved track. They would slide over to the rails track. This is representing just the evolution of the infrastructure in Germany, moving from getting coal along just earth ground to the river, to eventually paved ground, to eventually a long rail on the river. So all the dice get pushed over. Again, if any dice get pushed out, the current start player will decide where to push those on the board. White dice that get pushed out always get returned to Grafschaft Mark, and then black dice get returned to one of the 3 regions based on the icon there. In 1809, we see that any black dice that get pushed out will get returned to the Worden region. Players will receive these warehouses, because that is one of the rounds that players get warehouses, and all dice on the transport track in 1809 will have their pips increased by 1. So this will become a 4, this will become a 3, and this will become a 2. So we'll increase all dice on this track by 1. In 1860, players will get their warehouses. Black coal that gets pushed out will get returned to Breutsch, and all players, their choice, will get 1 victory point or 1 thaler. In 1880, players will get the final of their warehouses. Any black coal dice will get returned to the Essen region, and coal dice will be removed from the game board, so based on the number of players. So in a 2-player game, this will be done in reverse player order. So remember, the first player is always the one who's furthest upriver or to the right. So in reverse order, in a 2-player game, whoever's furthest downriver or furthest to the left would remove any black coal dice from the board itself. And then if this was a 3-player game, in reverse player order, one player would remove a black, the second player would remove a white, And then in a 4-player game, a black would get removed, then another black, and then a white, again in reverse player order. And it's actually the player's choice. So let's say this was a 4-player game. The player furthest downriver, because it's reverse order, will get to choose whether they remove a black or a white. And then the next player will remove one of the remaining ones, and then the third player would have no choice. They'd have to remove a black or a white based on what was left. And in the final round of the game, 1890, a couple things happen. We're not going to draw any tile out of the bag during phase 2, and players are not allowed to take these special actions on the far right during the last historical round of the game. And then at the end of this turn, the game will end. So after phase 1, after we've determined the historical event, we'll now draw a tile from the bag and determine the water level and demand. Here are the possible tiles that can come out of the bag. So let's cover each one. So this first one is basically no pilot actions. It could either be high or low water based on the shade of the blue, but basically the water is too difficult for pilots to navigate further down river. So what you do is you take this blocker and you're going to block all the special actions with that steering wheel there to say that they're not available that round of the game. These two are very similar. You'll do the same thing. You'll block all pilot actions, and also you'll increase all dice, or I'm sorry, you'll subtract all dice by 1 pip, or you'll increase all dice by 1 pip. And this is dice actually on the river, not the transport. So all dice on the river will get decreased by 1 or increased by 1 with this one, and in addition, no pilot actions. Any tiles with a gray background have to deal with certain industries along the Ruhr River. So if this tile is drawn, basically we'd place 1 thaler on each matching industry on the board. So this is gun industry, forage industry, and the hammer industry. So if this tile was drawn, we'd look for all gun symbols on the board, for example that one, and then we would simply put a thaler on each of those spots. So we'd look across the board and put a thaler on each of the matching gun industry spots. Keep in mind, each spot can always have only a maximum of 2 thalers on it. So maybe that spot got thalers from a previous one. You could never go over 2 thalers during any of the thaler placements during this phase. So if this tile is drawn, we'd put a thaler on each matching forge industry on the board, and then each matching hammer industry on the board. If this one gets drawn, you can see it has the same gray background. Here we've got some region crests. So basically we place a thaler on every industry within the matching region. So here, this one had 2 regions. It had the Breutsch region and the Berg region. So we'd go to both of those regions. So the Breutsch region, we can see we've got that industry there. I don't see any others. And then the Berg industry, we have this region. If there were multiple ones, for example, if we go to Grafschaft Mark, we can see that there are multiple ones here. And so if this tile gets drawn, basically you put 1 thaler on every industry within that entire region. This tile with the yellow background represents different cities on the game board. So we'd place a thaler on each matching city. Now the city crests correspond to the actual city, and it's a little bit difficult to see, but you can see that J crest behind Blankenstein, and that matches that one. So for these 3 cities, each of those cities would get a matching thaler. And again, I like to use a player aid just so I have a reference of the different city crests based on where they come out. If the green tile gets drawn, we're going to place 1 thaler on Ruhrort. So that's down here. So the next player that does a delivery to Ruhrort would get that thaler as a bonus. The yellow tile, all action costs are reduced by 1 for this round only. So any of these action costs, these would be free, and these would only be 1 thaler to take those actions. The red one, transport dice on the arrow are increased by 1. So specifically only dice on the arrow. So this would go to 4 and this would go to 2. And then finally the blue tile, we'd place 1 thaler on Mulheim and Blankenstein. So Mulheim is the city over here, and Blankenstein is this city here. So each of those would get 1 thaler. And again, keep in mind, we can ever only have a maximum of 2 thalers on any space. So if any of the spaces that call to get a thaler already had 2, we simply wouldn't place it. And also, the tile that gets drawn from the bag gets removed from the game. More tiles will be added to the bag as players build locks throughout the game. So if a player built this lock, this would get thrown into the bag and possibly drawn later. And then finally, remember, the last round of the game calls for no tile to get drawn from the bag. So that's important to remember, to know that you can always know that you have the ability to do the pilot action in the last round, because the tile that prevents the pilot action cannot be drawn. All right, so once we've determined the historical event, then we've drawn a tile from the bag. The next phase, the third phase, is to actually choose your option and to position your barge. And keep in mind, turn order is always the player further upriver, so the player upriver would make this decision first. They would decide if they want to use any of the special options available to them, and they would place their barge on the river, and then the next player further downriver would take that action. If it's in the first round of the game, we would just randomly determine a start player and then just move clockwise. So let's say the yellow player is going first. A couple things to keep in mind. You can always move your barge downriver to a coal spot, but you always have to place on a spot that actually has coal to be delivered, because every round during the game, a barge has to be placed adjacent to coal, and that coal is actually going to get delivered. It's important to realize that you have to dock your barge onto a spot where you can legally deliver that coal. So you're going to notice that some of the docking locations have the pilot action. That's because the default movement to deliver coal is always 2 spaces. But some actions require you to deliver further. And so putting here would be 1, 2. You see, this is a coal pickup spot. So 1, 2, that's not a legal location. So in order to legally deliver this coal, you would have had to take the pilot special action, and we'll cover each of those, because the pilot special action allows you to break the rule of only being able to go 2 spots. You can go as far downriver as you like to actually deliver the coal. So you could, if you have the pilot's action, you can go 1, 2, 3, 4 and deliver to this city, or you could even go further and deliver all the way to Ruhrort. So keep in mind, when you're placing your barge, it has to be placed on a spot where you can legally deliver that coal. And let's say in a previous turn, I had delivered this here. I'm always allowed to position my barge as far downriver as I want. So I may decide to skip this one, and then maybe position my barge all the way down here to deliver this coal. Also keep in mind, placing your barge in the blue region, the Grafschaft-Mark region, is prohibited until you actually earn that technology, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I think it's important now to cover all the special actions that can help you in placing your barge. So for each of these, this first action, and you can see both of these are free to take, they cost no thalers. This first one is called the transport action. The player who takes it immediately moves a coal die from the arrow space on the coal transport track to an empty coal storage space on the board. So basically, if I took this, and let's say I was here from a previous turn, let's say this isn't the first round of the game, I had delivered to that industry on a previous turn. By taking this, I immediately come here and I can take only the dice that's on the arrow spot. And I could put that on any coal storage spot on the board. So maybe I'm up here and I want to be able to come here. So I'm going to put that coal there, and then as we talked about before, I'm free to kind of flow down river, and then I can position my barge there, and because I use the transport action, I've put that dice there ready for pickup. Now I could have put that there and decided to flow down river to here. It doesn't have to, I don't have to put the dice where I position my barge, but that gives me a useful option. The next one is the pilot action. So the pilot action is the player, I can deliver coal as far downstream as I like. And in fact, this is the only way to ever get coal delivered to Ruhrort, this export market, is by taking this pilot action. So if I was to go here, now that gives me flexibility. Now I could potentially position here because I know I have to have the pilot action to deliver that coal somewhere because it's outside of the legal to move. Or I could take the pilot action and maybe I just go downstream and position my barge here because I want to deliver this all the way to Ruhrort. I could have delivered this coal all the way to Ruhrort as long as I'm moving downstream. Now keep in mind, if I was here and I took the pilot action, I can never go upstream. I could never go upriver and position to this one. I'm only freely allowed to move downstream to position my barge. So what if I did want to move upriver? Well, technology in the 18th and 19th century was primitive. So our barges didn't have motors, so they had to get hauled upriver by horses. So I can actually come here instead and take this hauling action. Basically, the player can choose to move to a coal storage space upriver of his current barge location. And you'll see it costs a thaler. Later in the game we talked about those prices will go up, but at the start of the game it's only 1 thaler. So at this point I can move my barge upriver to a legal spot. Since I don't have the tech there to go there yet, maybe I move to this spot. Let's say I did have that technology to move into this region. I could come all the way upriver and maybe position myself in this spot. The normal rules apply though. If I didn't have the pilot's action, I couldn't position in a spot with the pilot symbol because I just took the hauling action. But as we're going to see, there are some combos where you could potentially do both. It's important to realize also that the positioning of your barge and the selection of a special option are interdependent. They happen at the same time. And you're not obligated to take any of these. These are optional. It's typically wise to take something that aids the placement of your barge, but they happen at the same time and these are optional. So we've talked about the core actions, the transport action, the pilot action, and the hauling action. We'll see these other three are combinations of those same actions. One thing that's important to keep in mind that the graphic design on the board is nice because it helps you realize where this coal would get delivered. So if, well, there's no coal here, but let's say this coal, it's showing you a gray arrow and the next gray arrow is coming into here. So it's kind of showing you visually that is 2 spots away. 1, 2. Just like this orange is delivering in to Witten 2 spots away. That's why these ones with the captain symbol is showing you that it would have taken the captain's action to deliver this coal, or I'm sorry, the pilot's action to actually deliver this, because there is no dice that's legally only 2 spots upriver. You see this one is 1, 2, 3, 4 to get here, so you would have had to take the pilot's action to get to that one. And that's why on some of the coal placement spots it shows you that to legally deliver this coal you would need the pilot's action because there is no delivery spot legally 2 spots away. So let's look at these other ones. This gives you the transport action and the hauling action. So let's say I had the technology to be in this region and I wanted to move all the way upriver, but there was no dice here. I could pay the 2 thaler and take a white dice off the arrow track, move it there, and since I hauled with my horse, I could position my dice there with the dice that I took off the transport arrow. This one gives you, for one thaler, the transport action and the pilot action. So maybe I'm very interested in delivering this coal here. So I use the transport action to take whatever dice is on the arrow. Keep in mind, these dice will always slide down after you take it. They never move up, but they always slide down. And you would take it and place it right there. Now remember, I'm always able to freely move downriver from any spot, and since I have the pilot's action, I move dice there and I position my barge on the pilot action, so now I can freely deliver it anywhere downriver, including Ruhrort. And then finally, here's the hauling action and the pilot action. So now I can haul my barge upriver and place it on a spot, or have the pilot's action. So maybe I decide to move my barge upriver to this spot. Now keep in mind, I couldn't move it upriver to a spot without a dice. You always have to legally place it on a coal spot because that's the coal you're going to deliver. The final two actions actually require that you have earned the technology on your board first to be able to take that. But let's say you had the technology to take that action. You could come here and basically you'd get 2 thalers immediately. And then you can position your barge downriver on a legal spot with coal. Only one player can go here each round, so once one player has gone there, nobody else can take that special action. And in this special action, as long as you have the technology to take it, you can take it every turn if you wanted to, and slide there, and that allows you to immediately increase the value of a coal die along the river by 2. Always a maximum of 6. Coal die will never go above 6, and it will never go below 1. But by placing there, you could increase any die on the river by 2 if you had that tech. And as we talked about before, during the 12th round of the game, these special actions are prohibited from anyone taking them. So once every player has taken their special action and positioned their barge, remember that's done in turn order, player further to the right acts first, then the next phase is we actually deliver coal. And again, that's done in turn order, so the player furthest to the right goes first. So the turn order may have changed from the last round. In this example, yellow took the pilot action, and he just sailed down river to here. He went first. And then the red player decided to take the hauling action, and he hauled his barge upriver to this one. Now in the next phase is when we deliver coal. You'll see red is further to the right or further upriver, so they're going to act first before the yellow player. Okay, a couple things happen when we deliver coal. You'll remember we talked about you can only go exactly 2 spaces unless you've taken the pilot's action. So in this example, red does not have the pilot's action. So they will go 1, 2, and deliver this coal to this small scale industry. Now, if the coal dice passes over any obstacles, it gets reduced by 1. So this 3 would go down to 2. Now let's say they were delivering this one and they went way down river because they had the pilot's action and it passed 5 obstacles. It always only decreases by 1. It doesn't matter how many obstacles it crosses over, but as long as it crosses over at least 1, the quantity of the coal will decrease by 1 pip. So when the coal is delivered, you take it and immediately put it onto the transport track. The first dice always goes onto the arrow spot, so if there were no dice here, it would go there. But since there was one there, it goes there. If this was full and one got pushed, all of them would get pushed down, and this would get pushed out. And as we talked about, the start player would have to decide where to put it based on the region. And then based on the value of the die delivered, that's the number of thalers gained. So this was a 3 die, but it lost 1 pip by going over the obstacle. So now the player is going to get 2 thalers for that delivery. If there happened to be a thaler on that destination as a bonus, that player would also get it, but there wasn't one there. Also, if a player delivers to a city and a player actually has a warehouse in that city, each player with a warehouse gets a bonus thaler from the bank. So anytime someone delivers to a city where you have a warehouse, you get a bonus thaler. It doesn't have to be only you delivering that. But in this example, they delivered to a small-scale industry with a 2 pip die after it crossed the obstacle, so they got 2 thalers. Now, based on the type of delivery that you've just done, this is where you earn a development cube towards the accomplishment of a progress marker. So the development cube will always cost 1 thaler. So you always have to turn in one of the thalers you just earned to place your development cube on your board. And it's going to go into one of these 6 spots. If I delivered a black cube, you see the top row is black cubes, or black dice, and the second row are white dice. So I delivered a black dice to a small scale industry. That's one of these gray things. So I would place a cube right there. If I instead delivered a black dice all the way to Ruhrort, and we'll show that with the yellow player, I would place it there. And if I delivered a black dice to a city, these are these orange cities, I would place it there. Similarly, if it was a white dice to an industry, I place there. A white dice to Ruhrort, I place there. Or a white dice to any orange city, I place there. So in this example, I delivered a black dice to an industry, I placed there. I played 1 thaler to actually place that. Now let's say I delivered in a future turn, I got that one and that one. I had all 3 of these slots filled up, and I again delivered to an industry. If there's no spot to place the cube, you don't place it, and you also don't have to pay the thaler. So after paying for their development cube, the red player had 1 thaler left, and that just gets placed on their board. So let's look at the yellow player. The yellow player actually took the pilot action, which allowed them to kind of move downriver and position here. So they can move their barge as far downriver as they want. So they could deliver to this orange city, they could deliver to this small scale industry, but they want to go all the way and deliver to Ruhrort. Taking the pilot action is the only way that allows them to do that. So they're going to move all their barge all the way down to Ruhrort. They'll take the furthest left spot. This dice is crossing multiple obstacles along the way, but as we talked about, it only ever goes down by 1. So they're delivering a level 3 dice to Ruhrort. You saw there was an incentive placed here from one of the tiles drawn earlier. So the player is going to get that thaler along with the 3. And you always get a bonus thaler for delivering to Ruhrort. So that was the incentive thaler that was on Ruhrort. Here's the bonus thaler for delivering to Ruhrort, and then you get the pips of the die. So this total delivery was a value of 5, which was pretty good. Now the player will have to always pay 1 to place their development cube. So this is the yellow player. They delivered a black cube to Ruhrort, so that goes there. And then they've netted 4 thaler that go on their player board. The other thing that happens when you deliver to Ruhrort, this dice will obviously go onto the coal transport track. Nothing gets pushed down yet. Let's say there was another dice there. These would just get pushed down there. And so if the transport action was taken later, you're always taking the dice that's actually on the arrow. You don't have a choice. But when a dice gets delivered to Ruhrort, based on the value of the die, this export marker will move. So since it was a 1 to a 3, it just moves 1 spot. If it was a 4 to a 6, it would actually move 2 spots. It would go 1, 2. But this was only a 3 dice, so it moves 1 spot. Now, multiple players can deliver to Ruhrort on the same turn. If they both took the pilot action, the next player would just go into this 2 spot, and they're actually considered further upriver for turn order ranking. And then as we talked about during the coal delivery phase, any coal that gets pushed off the track, the start player, the current start player, so whoever's furthest right on the river, would determine where it gets placed, either into Grafschaftmark if it's white, or into one of the other territories based on the round marker. So each player in turn order will deliver their coal, collect their thalers from the delivery, pay for their development cube, and then we're ready for the next round. The reason why turn order will be important here is because the next phase is actually claiming progress markers, and that's done in turn order. So the player furthest to the right will claim progress markers first. So players are eligible for the same 8 progress markers on their board, but you'll remember there's also these limited progress markers. So the first player to claim progress markers could potentially take one, prohibiting other players from getting that. The requirements for getting a progress marker are indicated on the board here. So for getting this first one, you would have had to made 2 black coal deliveries to an industry, 1 black coal delivery to Ruhrort, and 1 black coal delivery to a city. That corresponds to this right here. So as you're putting cubes right here, you're seeing whether you've met the requirements to collect this technology. Again, with the special ones out here, those are listed here. These are the one-time technologies. So during the first round of the game, you're not going to claim any progress markers, any of these technology progress markers. But let's say on the second round of the game, yellow player made a delivery to a black coal delivery to a city, got that one, and they were the first person to do it, and they maybe were first in turn order. You can see they'd qualify for this progress marker. They'd add this to their board. All other players, since that was the last one in a 2-player game, would just say, oh, I'm no longer eligible for that. These one-time progress markers can be used at the player's discretion one time. Some give endgame bonuses. So let's cover all the progress markers now in terms of what they do. All right, so this progress marker corresponds to that. It's called the Essen Warehouse. It basically allows the player to now build warehouses in the 3 Essen-Werden cities. So you'll see there's 3 orange cities in this Essen-Werden region, the dark green and the oranges. That's where the colors are, and the dots are kind of showing you where the cities are. It's actually in the next phase that we're going to get to, where players actually get to convert their thalers and actually build infrastructure along the Ruhr River to earn victory points. So this allows you to build warehouses in the Essen-Werden region. This one, let's actually go to this one. This one is the Grafschaft warehouse. So this allows players to now build in the 3 Grafschaft cities. So that's this blue region. So there are 3 cities in the blue region, and having that technology allows a player to build warehouses in that region. This one is the coal depot. Once you get that progress marker, you can now build in all the coal depots on the board, and it's anywhere on the board. This one is the lock building. So this allows you to build locks in the next phase, and you can build locks anywhere once you get that technology, and we'll talk about that. Building a lock is just discarding this tile from anywhere on the board and earning victory points. This next one is Port Ruhrort. Once you have this progress marker, you can now build warehouses in Ruhrort. And then this progress marker is the Grafschaft Mark. You can now place your barge in the blue region. So until you earn that technology, you can never place your barge or deliver white dice, because white dice are in the Grafschaft Mark region. These 2 special action markers are available to every player. They're not limited. This is the wage action. So once you earn this one, you're able to take this special wage action that we talked about. And the other one we talked about was the supply action. Once you earn this technology and place it on your board, you're not able to take that as a special option when you're placing your barge. All right, let's cover the limited one-time use ones real quick. This is the coal hauler. You can increase a coal die by 3 anywhere on the river. Here's the hauling action. So once in the game, you can choose to take this action without having to pay the cost. Now keep in mind, the action would have had to have been available to you. So it couldn't have been blocked, but it allows you to take it without paying the cost. The one restriction here is the special action you take has to include the horse action. So it has to include one of the horse actions. It couldn't be that one. Here you could get 3 thalers or 2 victory points at the end of the game. Your debt doesn't matter in this case. This one allows you to pay 2 thaler instead of the normal cost to build a warehouse in any city in the game. Now keep in mind, you've got to have the normal technology, so if you want to build one in the Essen region, you have to have that technology or the Grafschaft region. But the special power of this one is it's the only way you can build a warehouse in this region up here in Molheim. And there's a bonus at the end of the game if you have a warehouse in every city on the board game. So that's the only way to actually get one into that city. This one is the Ruhr Barge. So at the end of the game, if your barge ended in Ruhrhort, you would actually get 4 victory points. That's what that's saying. Otherwise, you would just get 2 victory points if you had this progress marker. Here's the mayor. At the end of the game, you'd get 1 victory point for every thaler that you have left over. The only requisite is that you have to be debt-free. You would have had to pay off your debt to convert or to get victory points for each of your thalers. Here's the rail line. At the end of the game, you'd get 1 VP for each city warehouse that you have on the game board. So every warehouse in an orange city would give you a VP if you had that progress marker. Here, as part of the expansion, is the coal shop. So this gives you a free Ruhrhort warehouse move. So we haven't talked about it yet, but during the next phase when we're building things, one of the things you can do is pay 2 thalers to move your warehouse to another spot in Ruhrhort. This allows you to do it for free. And then finally the merchant. Obviously these are all one-time use. So one time when you're getting a development cube, you can place it anywhere you want on your board instead of the specific place that you actually satisfied the cube for. So the next phase of the game is actually making purchases and scoring VPs. So after we've done the historical event, drawn the tile, all players positioned their barge and chose their special option, they delivered their coal and got thalers, then they saw what progress markers they qualified for. Now we're going to convert those thalers and technologies into actually purchasing infrastructure. So the first thing we can do, and you can keep in mind that these 5 spots are what give you the ability to make purchases. So as we talked about, you can build warehouses in these regions or into Grafschaft, or you can build coal into the coal storage areas, or you can build locks, or you can build a warehouse in Ruhrhort. So let's cover each of these real quick. So let's first covering building these warehouses. So based on where you have the warehouse, you can build it. You take an available warehouse and you would place it on the spot. The first one in here, you can see, is always a cost of 3. The next one is 4. The next one's 4. And the final one is 5 if it was a 4-player game, because you can only ever have 1 warehouse in a city or a coal depot. Only 1 per player in each of those cities or in each of those locations. In Ruhrhort, you can only ever have 2 in Ruhrhort. But in each of the cities, you would place it, you would pay your thalers, and then you would score victory points. For every warehouse that gets placed on the board, whether it's in a city or a coal depot or on Ruhrhort, immediately gets you 2 victory points on the score track anytime you place a warehouse. So one correction, while the cities have a limit of 1 per player and Ruhrhort has a limit of 2 per player, coal depots you can have as many as you like on a coal depot. So you may have two cities. You can see, or 2 warehouses. You can see the first one is 2 to build, the second one's 2, the next one's 3, and so on. But the player with the most at the end of the game in each of these are actually going to score points. Building a warehouse in Ruhrhort follows the same cost structure. The first one built in Ruhrhort costs 3, the second one 4, the third one 4, the fourth one 5, and every one after that will always cost 5 thalers to build in Ruhrhort. And you can only ever have 2 total warehouses in Ruhrhort, and ever only 1 per column or 1 per flag. So these were the warehouse builds. If you have this technology, you can build locks in the game. So building a lock costs 2 once we get to here in the round, and you'll remember it goes up to 3 thalers to build a lock. And basically you take any lock anywhere on the board and put it into the draw bag, and you will score VPs for that lock. If you build in the Essen and the Broich region, that's 2 VPs. And if you build a lock in the Grafschaft Mark region, that's 3 VPs for the lock. This is the only 2 and 3 player variant in the game. If it's a 3-player game, just on the first build only, players can build 2 locks for the price of 1, and then you'd score VPs for both of those locks. If it's a 2-player game, you can actually build 2 locks for the price of 1, through turn 5, and you score VPs for both of those. One very important concept is you can only take the build action once per progress marker. So let's say you had the thalers to build warehouses in all 3 of these Essen cities. You can only build once per turn during this game round. Now you can build a warehouse here and a warehouse here and maybe build a lock because you're only using a progress marker once to take the build action. And then on your next turn, when the game round moves forward, you could do it again and do it again. But during the specific build phase, it's only once per progress marker. And then keep in mind, all the builds happen in turn order. So whoever's furthest upriver, do all their builds first, and then the next player in turn order will do all their builds. It's also during this phase that you can pay off debt. So if you actually had put a warehouse here and collected 2 thaler, you can pay 3 thaler to the bank and get that warehouse back for use and not have to worry about that debt at the end of the game. The final thing you can do during the build phase is pay 2 thaler to move a warehouse. So if this yellow player decide they want to move their warehouse there and pay 2 thaler, this red one would just slide up. So you always move to the topmost available spot. So if you wanted to move it here, you couldn't because you can only have 1 warehouse per flag, per column, and only 2 total warehouses. But if they wanted to pay 2 thaler, that one would simply move up. Once we actually finish the make purchases phase of building locks and warehouses, we actually go to the export phase. And the export phase is actually only going to take place in the rounds where there's a flag. Basically, this country has a demand for goods, and the players that actually have warehouses supporting those countries will score victory points. So let's say we're in this round of the game and Belgium had a demand for goods. We'd look at the Belgium column, and players would score VPs based on where their warehouse is on the row. You can see that's the 1 row, and then where the export marker was down here. So yellow would get 1 plus 1, and red would get 0 plus 1. You can never lose points here, so you can never go negative. You can only gain points. And then for each warehouse scored in that column or for that flag, this marker will go back. So 2 warehouses were scored, so this will go back 2 spots, but it can never only go back to the starting spot. So to obviously collect the VPs, you have to have warehouses in the column based on the flag of the round. And then once everyone scored their VPs for their row placement and this marker, then it moves back based on the number of warehouses scored. At the end of the export phase, that marks the end of the entire round. So all players, any thalers above 10 would have to discard down to 10. And then we move the round marker forward and repeat the whole process. If we were at the end of the game, at the end of this round, then we do endgame scoring. So during the build phase each round, players are earning victory points for warehouses put on the board and locks built. In addition to that, they're also going to earn endgame victory point bonuses. So if a player has a warehouse in all 3 of the Essen cities, they'll get an additional point. If a player has warehouses in all 3, at least 1 warehouse, obviously you can only have 1 warehouse per city, 1 warehouse in each of the Graft cities, they'll get an additional victory point. If the player has a warehouse in all 7 cities on the board, they'll get 3 bonus victory points. If they have a warehouse in all 4 of the coal depots, they'll get a bonus 2 victory points. And then we go to each of the 4 coal depots and we see who has the most number, whoever has the plurality. Whoever has the most in each coal depot gets an additional bonus victory point. We then score bonuses for players that have these progress markers. You'll remember this one could have been used for 3 thalers, or they could have got the 2 victory points at the end of the game. Here, 2 victory points or 4 if that player ended with their barge in Ruhrort. Here, as long as the player is debt-free, they get 1 victory point for every remaining thaler they have on their player board. And then here, if this player has this progress marker, they get 1 victory point for every warehouse, for every city that they have a warehouse in. Players will also lose 2 victory points for each remaining debt marker they still have on their board. Tally up all the victory points, and most victory points wins. And that should be everything you need to set up and play Ruscha Fahrt.